All of a sudden, I saw myself above the church looking down, and I saw my body laying on the pew where I was laid, and I saw people in the church crying, praying, doing everything. I saw my own children in the church praying and being very distressed. We are faced with difficulties like never before. Many people in our communities and part of our church even lost their jobs because of the mandates to get vaccinated. And it's just unheard of for a country like the United States of America, which was the gold standard for freedom of choice. And when people step over all of that, so what do? Maybe there is time for some of those nurses who lost their jobs to go into politics. Maybe it's just a school board, maybe it's a neighborhood association or whatever it is initially, but we cannot just stay silent, because we have the experience, we have tasted the sourness of people dictating and people abusing each other. And this country, America, can be a very dangerous place almost overnight if things continue to go down this way.
Добрый день, добрый вечер. Нам очень приятно, как обычно, быть на этой передаче. Очень интересно нам приходить с разными интересными гостями, с пастырями, с разными служителями и также с активистами и политиками или представители разных городов, разных штатов. И мы приходим, чтобы сюда вам помочь объяснить немножко ситуацию в Орехоне, как все это происходит, немножко поговорить о наших разных выборах и также поговорить, как все это работает. Сегодня будет передача на английском языке. У нас гость с церкви, румынской церкви. Он пастор румынской церкви, одна из самых больших церквей, которые здесь в Америке. Хорошо, спасибо, что вы к нам подключились. Оставайтесь с нами и надеемся, вы что-нибудь интересненькое сегодня услышите. Pastor, thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to have you here. I remember it was probably about a year and a half. The first time we met was at a rally. It was a very interesting rally. I think it was a prayer rally, a worship service at the Capitol. Salem, yep. And when I heard your story, it really touched me, and I wanted to learn more. So I'm excited that you were able to join us today, so we can pick your brain a little bit, learn more about your background, your story, and the Romanian church. Because what's interesting is, our Slavic community, we kind of woke up maybe 2.5 years ago, and we got really, more active than ever before. And I guess I noticed that the Romanian community also similarly stepped up, and I would say maybe even before us in some ways. So I would love to learn a little bit more about you and your community. And then one thing I wanted to learn from you before we move on, can you tell me about your name? Because I know in Russian it's Vasile, and in Romanian it's a little different. Could you?
It's not much different. Vasile.
Vasile.
Yes.
Is it similar to Vasily?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you accept for those folks who call you Vasily.
No
you
problem.
Don't mind. Okay.
Yeah. I've been called a lot worse.
Got it. Well, thank you very much for being here. I guess if you want to just jump in and just introduce yourself to folks who never maybe heard from you, and we'll go from there.
Well, let me just thank you first for the opportunity. It was great to get to know some of your team members when you came to visit Philadelphia Church also a little while ago. And since then, I've been following you on your Instagram, and a lot of our people from the church are also, especially in those times, because there's so much uncertainty and there's so much need to hear the truth and to see what our brothers and sisters are doing in all different directions. And we are coming from the same part of the world, and we want to encourage each other and unite efforts when it's possible.
Absolutely. And from what I understand, the Romanian community, they were originally part of the Soviet Union. So, is that correct?
We were not. Romania was quote unquote independent.
Okay.
But very strictly following the direction from Moscow, I believe.
Okay.
So that was the Romanian communism.
And I noticed there's part of the community speaks Russian and some don't. What plays in that?
Yeah, well, most of the people who speak Russian are coming from Ukraine or Moldova.
I see.
Both of those countries were part of the Soviet Union, and there's a large population of Romanians who live in those territories because back in the history, they were part of the larger Romania. But the Romania, as we know it today, it has been since World War I.
I see. Okay, well, thank you. Well, yeah, if you can tell me, where did you grow up and where were you born and your childhood?
I was born in the center of what is known as Transylvania, the northwestern part of Romania. And by God's grace, I was born to Christian parents. My father was one of the leaders in the church for most of his life. And my mom was a very good believer. I was one of 5 children. And I came to the United States when I was 28 years old.
Wow. Interesting.
So something really interesting is that we hear stories from the former Soviet blocs, you can say, where there's a lot of persecution, church-related persecution. I mean, we know, we heard about the gulags and the fact that they were filled with people, they were political dissidents. I think a huge chunk of the people were religious, and that included everybody, Russian Orthodox, priests, Pentecostal Baptists.
Right.
How did Romania fare during the communism era? Was it as bad, equally, or how would you say?
Well, the Romanian church during the communism was conditioned to, kind of be confined between the walls of the church building. And a lot of people learned that they had to be quiet. Those people who spoke up and they became more active in activism of any kind that was not welcomed by the government. They just disappeared. They ended up in prison. They ended up being interrogated and followed everywhere. As a young man, because like I said, I was 28 years old when I came, I learned to go to school, do what I was allowed to do. And church was a big part of our life. My family and everybody, on Sunday morning, people were flooding the streets, going to different churches. And that was accepted by the communism as it has to be that way. But it wasn't easy. There was a lot of persecution, and we were not offered the opportunities that most of the other people were offered.
So, we're trying to get more of an idea of Romanians, because I have friends that are Romanians. We actually were talking in the lobby, and apparently one of my friends, last name is German, they went to the church, and you guys are familiar with them.
Right.
It's really interesting. So, how did the church? Are Romanian people, are they more religious than you would say, like the average Slavic person? You're saying that on Sundays, all the people kind of went to church anyway, even during communism?
I don't believe they're more religious. However, the background that I have, where I grew up, there was really our community. That's what we knew outside work and school. We knew the church. We had all our friends and all the families that our parents associated with, for the most parts, were believers. We would get together for prayer in the homes, and every opportunity we had, we were going to church. However, there was plenty of people that were, of course, not religious in any way, rather against, and so forth. I think most like other Slavic countries that you might be more familiar with.
Yeah.
Is it more of a Protestant or a Catholic religion?
Most of the Romania is Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
However, me and my family were Pentecostals.
Mhm.
Came from the Baptist background. There was an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, getting close to about 100 years ago. Now, when a lot of believers moved to believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and the Pentecostal church grew more.
I see. And did you originally grow up, you said you grew up in the church.
Yes.
Were you always very active, or something drew you to get more active? And have you always wanted to be a pastor?
No.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Actually, as a young man, I was pretty shy, and I didn't think that I will be a pastor. I look at my dad, and he was doing all kinds of ministry work. He was a choir director. He was a deacon in the church. He was the leader of the local church for many years, even though he was not recognized by the authorities to be the leader of the church, but all the members of the church respected him and recognized him. So, but for me, I preached very infrequently while I was in Romania, and after I came here in America, I was looking to be part of the community, and of course, I was met in the airport by many Romanian people from the church, which is now Philadelphia Romanian Pentecostal Church, and I just dropped in there. About a year after my arrival, I was elected to be a member of the board, and from there on, there was a constant struggle between my professional occupation, because I am by trade a mechanical engineer. My last job for several years was at Daimler Trucks, and I was in supplier management, and I enjoyed the job, but it was very demanding. But there was always this challenge, because I wanted to be part of the church, I wanted to volunteer, and by that time I was the pastor assistant to the founding pastor, Pastor Nicky Pop. So it was difficult to keep everything going together. But something happened in 2010 that made me decide to just step out in the faith and take the ministry as full-time.
Interesting.
So, kind of getting back to politics and activism, I think, like my parents and even Dimitri's parents, there was a reason why we left Russia, or there was a reason why, you left Ukraine. What was the main driving reason for you to even, consider coming to America? Was it just an opportunity issue? Was it a persecution issue? And then how did you get to America? Because I think a lot of people don't realize. They think, people just take a plane straight from, some country over to New York, or PDX over here, and that's usually not the case, especially for people that left a lot earlier than like 1890.
Yes.
Or I mean 1989, right before the fall of the Soviet Union. Can you kind of give us an idea of what was going through your mind? You were 28, so that's a pretty good age.
Yeah, I was married. I married at 23, my wife Rodica, and we had 2 children before I left Romania. And I escaped from Romania. I ended up into Istanbul, Turkey, in a refugee camp. And from there, it was a difficult road. However, they approved after a while for me to travel to Italy to be interviewed by the U.S. Embassy. And after I had that interview and I spent a few more months in Italy, they approved for me to come as an immigrant to the United States. And Portland, Oregon was the first place I came to. And the main reason was, I was persecuted. I didn't really think about leaving the country, and I didn't know if I will ever have the opportunity to leave the country. After I finished high school, I went into engineering, and at some point I was able to get a job. However, I was doing the work of an engineer with a salary of somebody who doesn't have any qualification. And I was okay with it because I understood that was, just life under communism. But more and more I learn about what is happening. Of course, the desire came into my heart to leave the country, and having children and all of that, it was difficult. My wife and 2 children were left in Romania when I went to the refugee camp, and thank God it wasn't very long, and I was able to bring them over here.
And what I noticed, in at least the stories that I hear, most of the either the pastors or just the people, the Slavics that did get persecuted, they never really showed any resistance to the government. The government that did persecute them. Was there anything like that in Romania?
Yes. People, just like in the New Testament, if you read the book of Acts, they were happy in a way that they were able to suffer for Christ and for what they believe in. And most of our parents and forefathers were that kind of believers.
Mm-hmm.
They were ready to take whatever treatment was given to them, but they will never turn their back to what they believe and who they believe in, which was Jesus Christ.
For sure. Did you? I know we have stories from our grandparents that are very, heartbreaking, and obviously that's something that they lived through, and they were persecuted, beaten, and imprisoned. Any stories that you maybe have that you can share with our listeners?
I was not myself interviewed, other than as part of the youth of Communist Party. They were trying to recruit me to be one of them, and during the interview, of course, my faith came up, and they gave me a hard time because of that for a while. Eventually, I disconnected with those people. My father, however, was interviewed many times, taken, because he was seen more of an activist into our own village. He would walk from one end to the other of the village, and he will call all the people to come to the gates and talk to them and say, come, we're having this church service, this is what's happening, just come. And that particular village ended up to be about 80% Pentecostal. About 20% or so were still Orthodox. And the Orthodox priest didn't like that at all, so he was constantly asking for help from the police and others to to fight back.
Interesting.
So how since we're talking about church and activism and just in general, like as Christians, what do people do or what they can do? How has that changed when we're in a completely different country? We're in the U.S. now, a completely different governing system where communism, so if I can explain how voting in communism worked, it was like the decision was already made, but they still had voting at the end.
That's right.
So it wasn't really voting. Kind of what it feels like sometimes here too, but in reality, even in the U.S., we know that voting does work. Because even the last election on the local level,
Yes.
there was a lot of good progress, I would say, or just progress in general.
Promise.
How do you see the church taking part in being active, if you can even put it in those words?
You mean our churches here in the United States?
Just in general, or just Slavic people that are Christian.
Yeah, Slavic, Romanian. I believe we don't give up. We need to stay involved. We need to learn what the issues are. We need to speak up about the issues and to respecting our faith and our image. We cannot afford to go downtown and engage physically with other groups who might be thinking differently, even though sometimes we feel like we want to do that. But we know that in control above everything is God. So for the people of faith, I believe that plays a big role into our lives. We know that God is in control. We know that He will ultimately take care of us. But one of the prayers that I learned when I was very, very young from my parents was, Lord, protect me from the things that I cannot protect myself, and I will do my part too for those things that I am able to do something about. So we need to do both. We need to be active, we need to vote, and we need to educate each other because our congregations are large. Philadelphia Romanian Church has a little over 1,600 members, adults, and a lot of youth, a lot of children, and not everybody is able to inform themselves to the level of what's happening at the local government, state government, or nation.
And go ahead.
Oh, well, the thing is, that's kind of where we're finding ourselves just within the Slavic, Ukrainian, Russian community is the fact that people are willing to, fill out a paper that takes like 5 minutes, maybe less sometimes in most cases. But it's the other part that's really scary is when you get that packet, the voting guide.
That's right.
Which is literally, I think, the one that came in for Vancouver, and it's not even it's a serious election, but it's thick, and people having to go through and read, and it's not written simply like a regular book or a story. It's pretty complex.
It is
what they're asking you to do, and it almost takes a legal expert sometimes to figure out if you're saying yes or no to a specific question, which I think education is like a huge part for our community. And
that's where we appreciate Slavic Vote getting involved because they have started doing a lot of that. And I believe also the issue is that people are not able to get the kind of choices that we would like to get. You look at the voter's guide and they say, well, person A is this, and that. Okay, pass. Person B is the same pretty much. Pass him too. So you end up with no good choice. And what do you do in that situation? So there is a lot of that going on, especially here in the Northwest.
Well, and speaking of education, that's actually a very important point that you point out, because that is very true. When you open up those ballots, There's usually no good choice at all. But one thing that we learned just doing this for a little while, and we try to educate the community, is there's two elections essentially that happen usually. There's the primary elections, the preliminary or the before the main election, and there's a general election.
Right.
And normally, when you look at the primary election candidates, there's a great selection of different good choices. And unfortunately, those good choices never make it to the general election. And that's where the issue is a lot of times. And one thing that we are trying to do, kind of to educate the Slavic community, is to participate in the primary election.
Yes.
That's where it's very important.
Yes.
And unfortunately,
Make a difference there.
Exactly, because that's probably, I would say arguably more important than the general election, because those good candidates are going to have a chance to actually win in the general. And one thing that a lot of people don't know, and we learned this just even recently in the last year or two, that in Oregon, in order to get those good candidates to the general, again, they have to vote for them. And a lot of times people don't vote for them. And there's two reasons for it. For one, obviously, people don't know about it and they don't vote. The second reason, they're not registered with a particular party. Because if normally a person is not registered with a party, they can't participate in those primary elections. And that means they don't even get a ballot. Or they might get a ballot, but it doesn't have all the candidates on there.
So somebody else is already making the choice for them.
In some ways, or they just don't get that ballot, because in Oregon it's called closed primaries, where you can only vote for those candidates if you're part of a party. So when people register, if you get that ballot or get that registration, there's your information, and then there's a party selection. And most people, they don't care about the party; they just put not affiliated with the party. And that's usually what causes this to happen. It's kind of a tricky, in some ways, I'd say it's kind of unfair. In Oregon, Washington doesn't have that, and this way everybody participates. And that's why they have much better candidates oftentimes on their general election. So that's one thing that we try to get out to the community, because I think that one thing alone can improve and I think that for one, it'll make the general election much more interesting, because there's a better choices that's going to be out there. So,
Very
but
good.
most importantly, we have to actually start voting in the primaries. That's another important thing. But speaking of values, and you mentioned values a few times, the Slavic community obviously has our values, which are, family values and kind of centered around family. I'm guessing it's similar to the Slavic community, the Romanian community. But could you speak a little bit? What are the values that the Romanian community values a lot?
Family is absolutely crucial, and it's not unheard of for most young people to stay with their parents, live with them until they get married and they have their own family. So we encourage that. Part of our teaching at the church is, family values, and it's important to go against the grain of what's happening in our society right now. And I believe we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect our children. There's so much negative influence over the children and over the families. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up in the same situation with the rest of the communities around us. And I appreciate the Russian, the Slavic, and we are in the same way, very family-oriented.
Right. I wish our communities were more united, or more, in a sense, work together more. I think we could have been a lot stronger that way. And I know that, at least in the Slavic community, there's always been that division of different denominations, and that created a big divide. And I'm a big believer in unity, and I always look for ways to bring that.
Yeah. Well, we have a large community of Romanians here in this area, and of course the church, our church is the largest in the United States, Romanian church. But there are a lot of large churches, and we're all busy, and we're doing our own thing. And if we don't make an effort to come together, it's just not happening.
And is there, so my guess, from what I know, there's at least 2 or 3 other Romanian churches in Portland metro area.
Yes.
Do you all work together, or are they different, denominations?
We, For the most part, we belong to different organizations, but we are together all the time. There's a lot of events that we do together. We're all brothers and sisters. There's no barrier. It doesn't matter if our church happens to be part of the Assemblies of God, and other churches are part of either the Romanian Union, which is a association here in the United States, or part of the Church of God, or part of another organization, but we basically cross those borders with no problem whatsoever.
Well, you recently just came from a conference in Texas, right? And,
Yes.
I think I saw an Instagram page that was called like Alliance of Romanian Churches or something along those lines.
Yes, yes.
What is that? And tell us a little bit about the conference.
We have 21 churches throughout the United States, which are affiliated with the Assemblies of God, and we created the Romanian Alliance. So we have at least one conference per year.
Within the Assemblies of God, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, with the churches that are part of the Assemblies of God. We also have the Romanian Convention, which includes churches in all different organizations. We haven't been able to have those for the last 2 years because of the pandemic, but we're looking forward to restart that.
Awesome.
So, as far as Romanian culture and just Romanians in general, do you see like a concentration of Romanians that are local to Portland, Vancouver area? What would you say the number is? Because we were trying to count up how many Slavics lived in, like, let's say, Portland, Vancouver area, and there was a statistic that was done about, I don't think it was like 10 years ago or something. It was close to 130,000. It's probably a lot more now.
Yes.
The sad thing is you can't tell who's who anymore because the Slavic community has integrated so much into the American culture. And I mean, even your English it's immaculate. I mean, it's perfect, which is a lot of pastors, they don't speak English that well. How has that affected the Romanian culture? Because I looked at the Romanian history, and over the years, the Ottomans, from the south, and then the Hungarians from like the west north area.
And the Russians from the north.
From the north. I mean, that country was not run over, but there's a lot of alliances. How has your culture survived so far? Let's say within the last 30 years, because let's take 1990.
Well, the Romanian culture is in Romania, but it's a different story for us over here. I'm not sure, and I don't want to pretend that I have the answer to how the Romanian culture survived in Romania, but obviously with influences from all kinds of other countries, including Russia. But for us here in the United States, I would estimate, and I heard numbers ranging from 20,000 Romanians in the greater Portland area to 40,000. So I don't know exactly, but we are, no matter what, we're a multicultural church already, and I believe that will be the case for most Slavic churches, because we have the younger generation that were born here, they go to school here. And by the way, my English is not perfect. Thank you for saying that. But what helped me, I was employed into companies, and I was forced to learn it, and I was with Americans all day long. So I only been the senior pastor and full-time working for the church for the last 10 years. As a matter of fact, this month is my 10-year anniversary. And before that, our church had only one other pastor for 32 years, and that was the founding pastor, Pastor Nicky Pomp. So the church was started in 1979.
Wow.
And I don't know how we're doing on time, but I want to touch a little bit on the story that I mentioned a little bit earlier, what happened to me and what made me decide to go into ministry full time. And in 2010, that's about 11 years ago, I had a major heart attack. And I'm not sure how much your audience or you yourselves believe in prophecies, but I had a word spoken from God that Satan is going to try to take my life. But God promised I will not allow it. So I didn't know where it was going to be coming from, what was going to happen, right? But on May 2nd, 2010, I had a major heart attack in the church at the end of a service. And what's important about that is that, of course, it took several minutes. Some people were saying 15 minutes. There are hundreds of witnesses because they were all in church. And some people thought it was 15, other 20 minutes until the ambulance came. But what was great, and the cardiologist said, the best place to have a heart attack is in the church because you have people praying for you, and number two, you have people to help you. So several people who knew how to administer CPR, they jumped and they did what they needed to do. They kept my brain oxygenated and all of that during that time when my heart, there was no heartbeat, my color was changing and all of that. But what I wanted to say for your audience and for you is that at that time, all of a sudden, I saw myself above the church looking down, and I saw my body laying on the pew where I was laid, and I saw people in the church crying, praying, doing everything. I saw my own children in the church praying and being very distressed. But at the next moment, I saw a group of angels way up where I was, kind of on the side, and I was looking at them, and everybody was with their back toward me, but they were moving their hands, and I understood in my spirit that they were debating something. And I, all of a sudden, I lost interest to anything that was happening down in the church, and I wanted to get closer to see their faces. To see, my question was, are they boys or girls? I thought they were very young, and I was getting close to them, and of course, they're angels. They're not boys or girls. I could tell that they were angels. And then in my spirit, I was made to know, and I can't explain all of this, but those were the angels that the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, talks about when Lazarus was taken to Abraham's bosom. And those were the angels that I saw. And where they were gathered, there was a place, very bright light, and that was the place to go completely out of this world. And one of the angels turned to me and said, "Do you want to go or do you want to stay?" And I said, at that time I looked back down and I saw like ropes, from me. I don't know if you guys remember 1970s, you were too young, but those balloons for commercials, and you see them in the movies still, but they were held down by ropes from different parts of the building, and like gas stations, they were floating up there with a commercial on it. But anyway, that's kind of how I saw myself, ropes to me. And my answer to the angel when he said, "Do you want to go or do you want to stay?" was, look at all these prayers. In other words, the prayers were holding me at that time. And the angel said to me, "I understand." The next thing I know, somebody was shaking me really hard. Sir, do you know where you are?" I said, "Yes, I know. I'm in church." So the rest is history. But that that thing, I realized how short life is. You know, I was busy, I was running around, I was trying to complete my master's degree at George Fox University, Master of Divinity. So I was, the senior pastor was traveling a lot, I was very involved at the church, full-time job, 5 children at home, wife with a business, and all that that was going on. And all of a sudden, my heart stopped. And after I recovered from that, which by God's grace was very quickly, the next Sunday I was able to go to church and to testify to everybody what happened to me and what I saw and all of that. It was just an amazing experience. But then I decided that if God calls me, I'm just going to leave everything and go into ministry. So that happened in 2011, not even a year later, when our senior pastor, he was like 74 at that time, he retired, and I was called to lead the church since then. So but there wasn't a hard decision to make, even though I gave up benefits and all kinds of stuff.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful story.
Yeah.
You touched on my next question a little bit about multiculturalism.
Oh,
I think in some of our communities, that's a very hot topic right now. I know there was just recently a big summit that happened in California, and that's one of the main questions about the Slavic community and multiculturalism, and the church especially. And I would say majority of the Slavic churches, at least in Portland metro area, are not very multicultural. They're more focused on the Slavic culture, the Russian language, and anything outside of that is there's a lot of resistance of that. And you mentioned your church is multicultural, right?
Multicultural, I think before is multicultural, is multi-generational, and that's what I love about our church. We have children, we have youth, we have young families, we have older people who are the grandparents and that kind of stuff. And it isn't easy because usually the older generation expect the young to behave in the same way, to love the same music, to do church exactly the way that we have done it for many years. And some have the idea that that's what we believe in and that's how we should be doing. And years from now, we want to make sure that the church is going to look the same as it is today. But the reality is different. So there is a balance. We have to accept, and the youth, the generations, they're growing in the midst of our churches, they have to understand and to appreciate, everything that they benefit from the older generation and their faith and faithfulness and sacrifices and all of that, and to respect them. But on the other hand, we need to let go a little bit to create an environment where they feel like they belong. That's the biggest problem. When young people start to think that I don't belong here, that church is going to start going down in terms of numeric and
Right. And we talk about multicultural churches, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know, there's some people who believe, keeping the culture is very, very important and preserving that as long as possible. But we see the more we live here, the more the younger generation is going to integrate. Do you think it's more important to preserve the culture or get the gospel out there and message out?
Absolutely. The latter that you said, we are, the time is short and we need to spread the gospel. We need to save our own first. And if we lose our children, what good does it do, to do all kinds of other great things, to have great buildings and to speak the language of our great-grandfathers if we do not reach with the gospel the people that we are entrusted to reach first.
Right.
I have 9 grandchildren, and there's one more on the way.
Congratulations.
By God's grace, and I look at those beautiful beings, and I can ask them to speak Romanian, or every opportunity I get to teach them Romanian, or I can tell them about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I much rather tell them about Jesus and made him know.
Right. So you're open to the multicultural. You're open to making sure not to have any barriers for that gospel to pass on.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the struggling point for us is that some people still believe that the children's Sunday school classes should be bilingual. They haven't been bilingual for several years now. It's completely in English. And Wednesday night service, which is a youth service, it's pretty much 100% in English. When I go there, sometimes I speak Romanian to them, and they understand, and or when they have a special guest, a Romanian guest. But we are open, and we have to be.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that question?
No, I mean, I think this is something that the Romanian community is kind of encountering. I think the Slavic community, and we've been to a lot of different churches throughout this 2.5 years, and some churches took a really good stand. I mean, some of them do services in English in the morning.
Yes.
And then in the there's like an hour break, and then they do the service in the native language. But as long as the reason we're even bringing this up is because Slavic vote.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How long are we going to remain Slavic? What defines me as being a Slavic when my children, they know English very well, and Russian is going to be their second language. In the third generation, it's really, I think, a responsibility of parents to teach their kids the languages. We just put a lot of emphasis on church to do it, and a lot of parents, they kind of say, "Here, teach my kids the language."
Right.
And I just don't see the church.
It's not realistic. It's not realistic. I mean, 2 hours or 4 hours a week to teach them. It's not possible.
True.
For sure. Well, as we start kind of closing down our program, we got about 7 minutes left.
Okay.
What kind of what did we not cover? Maybe that you wanted to speak on a little bit on, or just maybe look in the camera and send a message to the Romanian and the Slavic community of your heart for the city, for the state, what you're seeing right now that paralleling with the Soviet Union and the Romanian community back then, and I guess what would you tell them? Our message is always to get out there and vote, and that's where we can obviously make some changes. Obviously, the number one is still prayer, and but we have to start getting more active. In our opinion, what would you say to the folks?
I think we have a great opportunity to help our neighbors, and our neighbors, maybe Americans, maybe Latin, or Hispanic or any other groups. We are people of faith, and that is our strength. We have to continue to declare who we are. We need to tell people that there is a better way. And at the same time, for those of us who had the opportunity to spend time under communism, we cannot be silent. This society that we have around us now, they have no idea of the depth that they're approaching to, and the great danger. It sounds good to have the government administer everything for you, but it's a lot better to have the freedom and to be able to decide for yourself what kind of person you're going to be. we are faced with difficulties like never before. Many people in our communities and part of our church even lost their jobs because of the mandates to get vaccinated. And it's just unheard of for a country like the United States of America, which was the gold standard for freedom of choice. And when people step over all of that, so what do? Obviously, first is prayer. We need to continue to be faithful, to know that God who He is, and we believe in Him, and He will take care of us. Then secondly, we need to encourage each other, inform each other, and every opportunity we have. We already have people well educated in our churches, doctors, engineers, dentists, nurses, people who can make a difference. And maybe there is time for some of those nurses who lost their jobs to go into politics, to start, do something else and make a difference in our communities. Maybe it's just a school board. Maybe it's a neighborhood association or whatever it is initially. But we cannot just stay silent, because we have the experience. We have tasted the sourness of people dictating and people abusing each other. And this country, America, can be a very dangerous place almost overnight if things continue to go down this way.
Right, and so it sounds like you encourage and you're open for your community. You encourage your community or your church too, if they feel like they're led to run for a local office. You're open to that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Do you have anybody?
I think the conservative voice needs to be heard, and opportunities will come to those who are seeking it.
I know there's some folks from the Slavic community who have stepped up and ran or talking about it. I know there's only one person that I know in Michigan, Jacob. He ran for school. He's running for city council.
Okay.
Do you know anybody here locally from the Romanian community who are interested in talking about it?
Not here locally. We had people from our community here who ran for positions back in Romania, and he won, and he was there for a while. But I believe this country needs us. We're here for a reason. We have to be light and salt. We don't fight with the same armor that other people fight, but we are soldiers, nevertheless.
Absolutely, yeah. I believe, we're here for this time. I believe. Yes. I think we're here. God brought us here to hopefully prevent what's the country where it's sliding into. And I'm looking forward to our next program, and we'll announce that on our Instagram page. We have some interesting guests that are planned for next week and the next month as well. So tune in, and like always, if you have missed the part of this program or missed other programs and you would like to catch up, you can always find that on our Facebook page and Instagram page. We always put that out, and obviously all that is linked to our YouTube channel. So you can always just search Slavic Vote, and you can bring up all that information. So thank you for tuning in.
Выборы, кандидаты, стремления. Новая программа Slavic Vote Live. Каждую неделю в прямом эфире. Slavic Vote Live дает голос славянской общине по всему северо-западу. Мы говорим и информируем о важном в Вашингтоне, Орегоне, Калифорнии. По четвергам в 17:00. Присоединяйтесь к прямому эфиру на 10:40 АМ. Ищите Slavic Vote в соцсетях. Мы намерены продолжать продвигать свое видение и оказывать любую необходимую поддержку сообществу, чтобы изменить ситуацию к лучшему. Slavic Vote Live.